So before we start this video, I just wanted to highlight how uncommon shivering is. I don't want you to think that this is something you're likely to see very often, if perhaps at all, in your paint your own career. I've just looked at the stats of the number of pieces of reported shivering that we've had over the past 6 months. We keep a list of all reports of breakages, cracking, bad quality bisque, any problems is all reported and recorded in an Excel spreadsheet, and I've put that against the volume of bisque that we've sold over the past 6 months, and the likelihood that you'll see, or you would have seen, shivering over the past 6 months with bisque that you would have bought from us is 1 piece for every 14,400 pieces. So it's not very common at all. And also it's not even as common as those numbers would make out, because it's not across the board. Those reported cases are all in specific items that are more prone to shivering than others. So don't go thinking this is a common problem. Anyway, let's find out more about shivering. So shivering, this is an example of shivering. It's where the glaze has literally shivered off the side of the piece. And this happens as you're taking it out of the kiln after you've fired it, as the kiln has cooled down. What's actually happening is the clay is contracting at a different rate to the glaze. In ceramics we have an acceptable, what we call fit, and that's where the clay needs to match the glaze that we're using. We refer to it as the coefficient of thermal expansion, and if you ever see COE on a ceramic glaze, that's referring to what the expansion and contraction rate of that particular glaze is. Now, within the paint your own market, we monitor the bisque pieces that we supply you, the manufacturers that we buy also carefully control the components that they put into the clay body that is used in the pressing of the clay and the slip casting of the clay, to ensure that we get that COE fit to match the standard glazes that are commonly used in the paint your own market. In this little video I want to show you what happens when we get a report of a bit of shivering happening. So shivering, let me just explain exactly what it is. In the firing, the clay underneath the glaze will expand as the kiln heats up, as will the glaze. But the critical part is, as the kiln is cooling down, clay is contracting and shrinking more than the hard set glass sheet, the glaze that we put on the surface of the piece. The opposite of that is crazing, which is where the glaze contracts more than the bisque that it's put onto, and that's where you see that spider web of cracks appearing after you've taken a piece out of the kiln. And you'll also hear that pinging noise as you're taking a piece out of the kiln, and sometimes a few hours after you've taken it out of the kiln, where the stress between the glaze and the piece is just too much for that marriage between the glaze and the clay to accept. But we're going to be talking about shivering, and I want to show you some examples of shivering and what we do when we get a report, the rare occasion when we do get a report of some of our bisque having a shivering issue. So in preparation of a recent pottery camp that we were hosting, we had the very clever Rachel Morrison decorate some of these chickens for us, and we used all sorts of different glazes. We've used stroke and coat on this one, we've got the new foundation glazes on that, we've got foundations and crystal glazes, stroke and coat, foundations, more foundations, and they all seem to come out looking fantastic. However, we did see a little bit of shivering, and we didn't quite know why. We hadn't seen it on anything within this item before. We'd had no reports of problems with this piece, and we've been selling this for, I don't know, about a year now, this item. So we put it down to maybe a foreign material on the piece before we painted it. We refired the one that did shiver a little bit, and it seemed to be stable. So we ruled it out as a particular fault. This is the piece that did shiver, and as you can see, you can hardly see. It's nowhere near the shivering I just showed you just now on that big vase. It's just the glaze is lifted slightly, and if I tap it, I can feel that that glaze layer is slightly loose. But we didn't think that that was significant, and we went ahead and hosted the pottery camp back in May. So during the event, during the pottery camp, we were showcasing the foundation glazes, the Mako foundation glazes, and everybody decorated a chicken or a cockerel with the foundation glazes. And after the event, we had reports of maybe 1 in 5, 20% of the chickens that were fired after the event had instances of shivering on them. So we panicked and removed the entire stock of that bisque from our website while we investigated what the heck's going on. So the first thing that we tested was the foundation glaze on these chickens. So we've applied the white foundation glaze on 2 different batches of the chickens that we had in stock, and we had a similar outcome to what we'd seen with the people that had come on the course, in that this example, these are ones that we decorated very quickly here. Out of these 6, 5 of them are all good, but one of them has shivering on its back. So we also fired at the same time a couple of control chickens with clear glaze on, and they came out absolutely perfect. So that led us to think, well, maybe there's something going on with the foundation on this particular piece. So we investigated a bit further. Let me just show you, when we do tests, we need to control all the variables, and that means, not that many studios do this, including us very often, we put in witness cones just to check that the firing was doing what we wanted to, and that's giving us a good cone 06. So we knew that the firing was all good, and there was a problem with the white foundation on this piece. So as I said, we investigated further. So we suspected there might be some unhappy relationship between this particular piece and the white foundation. So we've taken bisque from 2 separate batches of the chickens that we had in stock, and we've just painted on 3 heavy coats of the white foundation onto a dozen chickens from the 2 batches, and fired them in a controlled firing to a cone 06 with a 10-minute hold. Now, if there was a significant problem, we would have expected all of them to develop the same fault, and I don't know, somewhat reassuringly but somewhat annoyingly, that's not what we found. So these fellas at the front, these 4, are all fine. Nothing wrong with them at all, come out perfect. We have these 4, which when we really scanned them, we found a little bit of shivering on the comb on this one, and insignificant shivering that you might not have noticed, to be honest. There's a little tiny amount by the eye on that. So 4 we classified as minor shivering, and there are 3, so that'd be 4, 8, that would be another good one, so there's 5 good, 4 minor, and 3 really major shivering on. So that was after a cone 06 firing. that highlighted that there was something going on with the foundation white, but not on everything. So on to the next test. So we did one final test, and that was to get 6 chickens and 6 cockerels from the 2 different batches of bisque that we have in stock. We painted the combs with SC 74 and 73 and left and exposed the rest of the bisque and dip glazed it with the standard glaze that you guys will be using, colour Obia 004, and fired just these 12, and honestly all 12 have come out reassuringly perfect. So I ought to add to that, just so you know, whenever we get a report of shivering, we take it hugely seriously. We have a standard policy on a report of shivering to go to the stock that we have here and do a clear glaze test on 6 items, 6 random items from that batch. If any one of those fails the test, then we will isolate the whole batch and investigate what's going on, and sometimes we will withdraw the whole stock. A few years ago we put into the skip, honestly we put into the skip about 20 pallets of bisque because the fit was off, and it was heartbreaking, but it would be even more heartbreaking to have sold that and to have unhappy studios contacting me saying that that had got out to the market. So it's hugely important for us to get on top of this. So after we'd had these successful pieces come out of the kiln, we decided to release the bisque back into stock, because the majority of the bisque that we're going to be selling, you guys are going to be applying your brand of colour, whether it's Mako or other brands, hopefully it's Mako, and using the 004 clear glaze or a similar glaze onto them, and you're not going to see a problem. Now the problem that we'd experienced would have been specifically a heavy coloured glaze like the foundation used onto these pieces, and in that instance we saw a 20% failure rate. So we booked a Zoom call with the head of Mako. We got involved, the technical at Mako, to give us their thoughts on why this was happening, and what we came down to was that, so they hadn't seen, I won't say they hadn't seen any issues with this particular piece, but all within the realms of acceptable occasional faults that are random, that they're going to get on certain pieces across the range. No reports with the foundation being a problem. So what I'm putting it down to is the coefficient of this particular batch of chickens is close to the acceptable level, and that close to the acceptable level is fine for the clear glaze, the stroke and coat to sit perfectly happily on, which is why we're confident to sell it to you guys to be used with the clear glaze. In 20% of the cases where we've used and seen people at the event that we held using the foundations, we had instances of shivering. So on these items, for these particular batches, what we're going to do is we'll put a note on that item on the website, just highlighting if you were thinking of using foundation, probably best not put it on these pieces, but with clear glaze you're going to be absolutely fine. And when we get the next batch of these chickens in, we'll do the tests all over again, and if we don't have the same issues, we'll remove that from the product. I just really want to emphasize that shivering, faults like this, we take so seriously, and we don't want to sell you anything that we think that there's a problem with. I hope you found this useful and informative.